3 people walk into a bar, 2 walk out. What happened to the third? This could be the start of a joke. However, in this case, the third disappears forever, and it turns out to be a nightmare. Could be very similar to something you would read or view on the Twilight Zone. This is what happened to Brian Shaffer. Brian Shaffer went into a bar with 2 of his friends, spent time there, walked out, met a couple of girls, was able to talk to them for a few minutes, and that was the last time he'd be seen going back into that same bar. So what happened to Brian Shaffer? Well, we're going to talk about that. Before we jump into that, though, welcome back to my channel, True Crime Fans. I'm your host, Tim Solberg. You know what to do. If you haven't hit that subscribe button already, let's hit that subscribe button and watch us continue to grow. Make sure you leave a like on the video if you enjoy the content, and leave a comment. I really want to hear from you folks. What is your theory on what happened with Brian Shaffer? There's a lot of information that's out there right now on the internet that you can read about this case. A lot of theories and a lot of conspiracies. So we're going to hit high level a few of those, put in a little bit of our opinion, and then I'm going to ask you, the viewer, for some of my enjoyment, to read some of your theories as to what you think happened to Mr. Brian Shaffer, and do you believe that he's still alive today? I'm also going to plug in that this story is very similar to the Corey Braun story in the way that Brian Shaffer disappears. A little bit of difference where Brian Shaffer doesn't ever leave the bar, or has never been seen leaving the bar, whereas Corey Braun was seen leaving the bar and ultimately disappears after leaving his friends going up to his hotel room in Canada. Very drastically different cases on 2 different spectrums, one in Canada, one in the US, but I do highly encourage you, go check out the Corey Braun story on my channel if you want to see what that's all about, and tell me if there's some comparisons. So let's talk about Mr. Brian Shaffer. A little bit of background on Brian Shaffer. He was 6'2", very sharp looking man. Did have a girlfriend that he was planning on marrying very soon, and seemed to be pretty tight with his family. Now, recently his mom died. This was something that he had been struggling with. Going through the forums, there was things that popped up. Now, keep in mind, this is all speculation. This is not something that's been official, but I do read some of this out of some of the true crime magazines. First and foremost, it is stated that Brian was having a hard time after his mom died. And Brian had made some comments to his girlfriend about wanting to pack up and disappear and just leave the world and start over new. Now, this is going to play back into the conspiracy theories as we go through the theories in a little bit here, that maybe Brian, that's something that he wanted to do, and maybe his girlfriend didn't want to do it, so he ended up doing it on his own. Now, it is also stated that there was some tension on the night that Brian disappears with his family, and specifically his father, based off of some of the things that were left in the will of his mother. Now, this again is all speculation, so I will attach the URL to the Crime Wire in the description that will explain a little bit more about some of the tensions that he may have had with his father and his brothers. I will leave that for you to read. That is not my story to tell, but if that is the case, maybe Brian was really wanting to start over new and wanting to get away from everybody that he knew. Now, Brian was a medical student, and it seems like he was very successful. It sounded like he was getting very good grades up until the point of his disappearance. Very smart guy, and again, like stated, 6'2", very sharp looking. On the surface looking in, it seems and appears that Brian Shaffer had a very good support system from both family and friends. With the speculation of some tensions that arose during a dinner on the night of Brian's disappearance, which would be March 31st, 2006, leading into April 1st, 2006, it seemed like the family was very supportive. It would also appear that his friends, William Clint Florence and Allison Reed, seem to be pretty good friends with Brian Shaffer as well. Now, there is some things out in the forums that do speculate that maybe Brian and Allison didn't get along, and that may have played into his disappearance at some point. Now, there's also speculation out there, or some facts, that Clint Florence elected not to take a polygraph test, and this will play into some of the conspiracy theories that we're going to hear here in a few moments. So that all being said, that's a little bit of background on Brian Shaffer. One last thing I do want to add is Brian Shaffer was a huge avid fan of Pearl Jam, ends up getting a tattoo of Pearl Jam, And ultimately, Eddie Vedder, when he does a concert in Ohio, stops and mentions Brian Shaffer and asks the public if they know anything to come forward. So there's a lot of eyes that were on this case, especially early on. So let's talk about some of the common conspiracy theories. The first one that stuck out to me was the smiley face killer, which basically it's been stated that the quote-unquote smiley face killer, which is currently just a theory, was a bunch of killings that happened between 1990 and 2011 that had some graffiti by some of these quote-unquote drowned college students that had a smiley face. Now, it hasn't been proved that it's been one person. It hasn't been disproved either, but there has been some controversy around it. I do suggest that you go do a search for the smiley face killer, and since this is not a video on the smiley face killer, I'm going to kind of leave it there. For me, this is just a theory. If this did prove out to be a theory or a non-theory or something that actually happened, that one or more people took part in making 45 college students disappear, Brian Shaffer would fit into the mold as to what this potential killer would be looking for. Okay, do I think that that happened? I am not on that train. Doesn't mean it didn't happen, just doesn't mean that that's a conspiracy that I'm currently following. The second one that's been very popular is that Brian Shaffer never left the bar that night, and something had happened inside that bar where Brian Shaffer essentially was murdered inside the bar, and that his remains were placed somewhere in the walls, and they're there currently today. Now, again, I don't think that that's the case, because I think that there would be an overwhelming smell, and I think that there would be construction going on, and I think patrons would remember some of that stuff happening while they were going to the bar shortly after Brian Shaffer went missing. Now, there's arguments to be made. There's other places in the bar that patrons don't go. There's places that this definitely could have taken place. Absolutely. Do I think that would be the case? I don't. Just for the fact that there would be too many people that would have to be involved to make this happen, and too many people that wouldn't be able to tell a secret for that not to come out. Okay. Another thing that we see is that Brian comes out of the bar sometime during the night. He's talking to two ladies briefly, and then you see him going back inside the bar. Now, that's the last time that Brian Shaffer's ever seen on video camera. We do know that the bar establishment does have video surveillance, but there are places like the emergency exit that does not have a video camera set up. Now, it is stated that maybe Brian was taken out of the emergency exit either willingly or against his will, depending on what theory you're going after, and that's how he got outside the bar the night, and that's how video surveillance did not pick him up. Now, could this be real? I think this may play a factor. Now, another theory is that Brian walked out of one of the exits that went into a construction area, and that he fell down some sort of hole and ended up having concrete poured over top of him. The workers came the next day, didn't realize that somebody had fallen, and then just went about their work, and he is currently still buried there today. Now, it has been said that cadaver dogs have walked that area and they haven't turned up anything, but again, there's a lot of speculation out there that maybe cadaver dogs would not be able to either smell them through the concrete, or that sometimes they're just wrong. Another theory that I think is very interesting is that Clint Florence may have had and played a part in his murder for whatever reason, and it has been stated, again, speculation, based heavily on the fact that Clint Florence hasn't taken a polygraph test yet. Now, for me, it doesn't point one way or the other, because Clint Florence, I would never recommend to take a polygraph test. If I'm not a person of interest or a suspect, I'm probably not going to take a polygraph test. The other thing is how unreliable is a polygraph test, right? So until it becomes 100% correct, why would I want to subject myself to that? Whether I'm innocent or guilty, that is something I do not have to do. I always recommend to people, always have your lawyer available and present when you're talking to any of the authorities. That is our God-given right to do that. Okay. Now, when somebody commits a crime, do I feel like they need to go through the court system, be proven guilty, and be put away for that crime? 100% absolutely. If somebody commits a crime, I am the first one in line that says that they should pay for that crime. Any person that lives in this nation has the right to refuse a polygraph test, and they also have the right not to talk to the authorities. These are just rights. Doesn't mean that they're guilty. It also doesn't mean that they're innocent. It gives a perspective to people that are viewing this, like me on social media, that maybe he's guilty of something. Keep in mind, from my understanding, Clint Florence was also a med student at the time and was probably pretty sharp and probably understood his rights and talked to a lawyer at some point, and the lawyer advised him against taking a polygraph test. Again, I don't know what his motives were behind it. I can only speculate. I will let you go on Reddit. Again, I will put that link down in the description so you can go on a trail. I think I was on Reddit for probably a couple of hours just reading what people had to say about some of the conspiracies, and I think that some of them are very good. Again, it's all speculation. It's stuff that people have heard of over the years, and some people even local, and some may or may not have known Brian. Many of them do claim to know Brian or know somebody that knows Brian. Again, I heard it from a friend who heard it from a friend is definitely not solid evidence, but sometimes it can spark some interest. Okay? Another conspiracy that I've heard is that Brian got out through the emergency door exit for whatever reason. He may have been intending to go home and just decided that he was going to walk since it was fairly close, and that maybe he got mugged and at some point he was murdered due to foul play and somebody moved the body. Very real possibility, as this was a high crime area at the time. Now, another one that plays into this as well, and we'll keep it as the same one, is that maybe Brian was hit by a drunk driver, and kind of the same principle. Maybe the body was moved and nobody was ever able to recover Brian's body at that point. Very real possibility. The last theory that I've heard that's been very interesting is that maybe Brian decided that he was going to go start a new life. This was something that he had discussed previously with his girlfriend. Also, just like any good conspiracy theory, there has been rumors that there has been sightings of Brian in places like Mexico. I'm going to cue the picture up here. You can tell me, does this look like an aged Brian? So now we're going to talk about what my theory is of Brian Shaffer, and it's one that I haven't heard a lot of to this point. I think a few people alluded to it, and I think that that's what probably piqued my interest the most. Now is my opportunity to talk about what my theory is and what my conspiracy is of Brian Shaffer. First, I'm going to say that I don't think Clint Florence had anything to do with the disappearance of Brian Shaffer. I think that Clint was probably very intoxicated based off of some of his feedback to the authorities of when they were bar hopping. There was a lot of shots that were being taken at each one of the bars, 1 to 2 shots at each bar that they went to, and then they ended up back at the Ugly Tuna. Now, I think that basically what happened that night was Brian Shaffer was having a lot of fun. He seemed to be a very social person. From what we've heard, he was a very nice person, very intelligent if he was going to med school, and his grades were really good. I think he walked out that night. He had talked to those 2 young ladies and was just making conversation with them. I don't think they have anything to do with anything. And I think he goes back and stumbles into the bar, probably really reaching that level of intoxication that you kind of become a little bit incoherent. Now, at some point, he may have went to the restroom, which I would assume is very close to some of the emergency exits, and at that point, he has decided to go home. I think some people have called this the Irish goodbye, where people sneak out when they're pretty intoxicated, sometimes not. Maybe they're not intoxicated, and they just decide that they're going to sneak out and not say bye, don't want to make a big fuss, just want to go home. I can tell you I've done this many of times, especially when I'm intoxicated and I just want to go to sleep. I don't want to make a big deal out of things. I just kind of move along. Now, people might argue, if you go to a bar with somebody, you should probably leave with them. I agree with that 100%. If you've got a good plan in place, make sure you go and leave with the friends that you came with. Plain and simple. That's the safest way to do things. But I have been guilty of leaving on my own before, especially if I wanted to leave prior to some of my friends. There's a river that's pretty close, which is called the Scioto River, and I hope that I'm hitting that right. I'm not from Ohio, so I might have not pronounced that right. Please correct me in the comments down below if I didn't say that right. I think that Brian left through the emergency exit, not really thinking what exit he was going through. I don't think he was trying to hide anything, and I don't think he realized that there was cameras there or not cameras there, because how would Brian know that, right? Unless he was a very active patron of that bar, and the owners of the bar were actively telling people that there was no cameras there. Is that a realistic thing? Yeah, it could have happened. Do I think that an owner that just put surveillance up because there's a lot of crime in the area would want to tell anybody where cameras are or aren't? I highly doubt it. But again, go through Reddit, you'll see a lot of different things based off of that. I think at some point that Brian may have been walking and maybe kind of got a little bit disoriented and ended up walking into the wrong area and somehow ended up in the river. And I think that he ended up in the river on his own. There's a couple of reasons that I feel like this. Is it a possibility that he got robbed and somebody threw him in there? It is. Based off of the amount of alcohol that Clint Flores claims, I think that it would be very highly likely that anybody in that situation taking that many shots, going bar to bar and drinking, and we don't know what his blood alcohol was, obviously, because they've never found him. It is plausible for somebody to get lost on their way home and end up somewhere where they have no idea. And if he's as intoxicated as I think he was based off of some of the feedback, it would be very easy to wind up somewhere like the river and not know what happened, end up there, not being able to swim. Obviously, you're that intoxicated, you would just get taken down river. Now, is there a possibility we'd see the body in the last, almost 20 years, 17 years? Yeah, you would think he might have popped up somewhere. Is it a possibility that maybe he did pop up somewhere and another department has actually found that body and it's just a case of mistaken identity or a John Doe that hasn't been confirmed? That's a very real possibility as well. And that would take some of the conspiracies out of it, but I think that whatever happened to Brian's own accord. Now, there's a lot of arguments that could be made. And I want to hear from you, and that's the whole purpose of this video. There's a lot of information out there. I suggest you go and see it, either read about it or go on YouTube. There's a lot of great videos that you'll see on this. There's a lot of great articles. I just don't see a lot of people going after the conspiracy that I just hit on, but I want to hear from you. What else have you heard? Put it down in the comments. Why do you think I'm right? Why do you think I'm wrong? There's no right answer here. We have a great community and we love when people share, but this is your opportunity and your turn to be able to come back and say, hey, Tim, you just got it wrong. And here's why. Here's some of the pieces that you missed and that are very important. Now, I would say the only thing that kind of throws me off with this whole theory is that his phone was turned on and it pinged 3 months after his disappearance. Now, could that be somebody found the phone and turned it on and then turned it off? Or is my theory completely debunked based off of that one piece of evidence alone? You tell me. Let's see it down in the comments. Every video that I do, I get some really great feedback. I don't always agree with it, but I do love that you take the time to engage, and we have a wonderful community. So this is your chance. Get down in those comments. Let me hear what you have and tell me if I'm on base or off base and tell me why. So that being said, I'm going to leave you with this. I'm your host, Tim Solberg. You know what to do. Let's hit that subscribe button. Let's leave a comment down below. And if you like the video and the way that I brought the content, hit that like. I want to get the video out to as many people as possible. And if you really like the video, share it out with a friend. We're trying to grow this community. I've just tapped on Lex to come help out. She's been working on the graphics. She's going to bring some more videos to you folks as well. Together, we're going to try to bring more content each week and try to do it in a way that the community enjoys by soliciting your feedback and enacting the things that you want to see. So based off of that, I hope everybody has a wonderful week. If you have any other ideas or any videos you would like us to bring to you, leave those down in the comments as well. And I will see you here this weekend. Have a wonderful day, everybody.